Phillips, I'm chairman of the committee, and also welcome to our other committee members, Vice Chair Elaine Mendoza, Laurie Bricker, who will join us in just a moment, Joe Hinton, Brenda Payovich, our student representative Trey Lewis. Also, we have here with us Deputy Commissioner David Gardner and Assistant Commissioner for Academic Affairs and Research McGregor Stevenson. Since our last meeting on January the 5th, our staff have been busy reviewing preliminary requests for requests for preliminary authority and also new degree programs, and we'll be looking at some of those today, as we usually do. And with the legislative session in full swing, the staff has reviewed over 100 bills and have prepared several very high quality higher education impact statements. Now we'll begin our agenda with agenda item 2, which is consideration of adopting minutes from the January 5th, 2009 committee meeting. Does anyone have questions or comments? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Motion made by Joe Hinton, seconded by Elaine. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Agenda item 3, a report on the Higher Education Policy Institute. Dr. Lee Holcomb is here with us, and he will present the report.
Good afternoon.
Hi, Lee.
How are you?
Good, thanks.
Today I want to report on some preliminary analysis that we've completed on tuition applications and enrollments of students. This is, of course, related to the impacts of tuition deregulation since 2003. In the long-term analysis, we've putting together a long-term analysis plan that would look more in depth at this. So what I'm about to discuss is a preliminary analysis that looks at 3 different strands. It's built upon, if you recall from the last presentation discussion that we had on January 5th, I discussed very briefly a review that establishes that student costs do impact enrollment decisions. As costs go up, student enrollments go down. There are some nuances to that, but that's the general rule. So we began an analysis to look at whether or not the tuition increases that we've experienced here in Texas has translated into any sort of student behavior that's consistent with that theory. And one thing to keep in mind is that in any data, it's very difficult to get at actual student costs. So that's why what I've done is I've looked at the relationship between tuition increases and tuition and actual student enrollment decisions, because the cost data that we have is very imperfect. So what we're looking for is any evidence that institutions have not effectively allocated additional tuition revenue to offset higher tuition costs for low-income and minority populations. And we've done that in 3 different ways, 3 different strands that are separate but related. One is taking a look at the percentage of Texas public high school graduates who apply to a Texas public university. I'm going to talk a little bit about the enrollment decisions, but first what I wanted to do is to take a step back and think about whether or not tuition increases have, for whatever reason, affected student decisions to even apply to a Texas public university. And what I've done is taken a look at this data going back to 1998. So for each fall since 1998, I've tracked the percentage of students who, percentage of public high school graduates who actually apply to a Texas public university, broken down by ethnicity and low income status. So I have a total of 6 different populations. And what we find is that since 2003, there's been essentially no decrease in the enrollment rates of Texas public high school graduates. Application rates of Texas public high school graduates to 4-year institutions. Now in 2002 there was a slight uptick, but since then it's been relatively flat. Okay, so that's the first analysis. Again, it looks at tuition. It looks at the application rates at Texas Public four-year institutions over time. And we don't see any decrease since 2003. It remains relatively flat. A decrease would be consistent with evidence that suggests that increased tuition has affected student behaviors. We don't see that decrease. The second strand is actually looking at percentage of Texas public high school graduates who enroll in a Texas public university, and that's more familiar. And likewise, that's flat since 2003, even since before. We've got we have no change in the percentage of Texas public high school graduates over time since 2003 who actually enroll in a Texas public university. So again what I was looking for when I did that analysis is whether or not the actual percentages would decrease after 2003. That would be evidence consistent with some sort of tuition effect or cost effect. And the third strand steps inside the process a little bit between application and actual enrollment. And it considers the time that cost actually first becomes personal to students, and that is when they actually get the bill. Sometime between the time a student actually applies to a Texas public university and the time that they're actually captured or enrolled in the enrollment data in Texas statewide, they get a bill. And there's a lot of factors that go into whether or not a student actually decides to enroll in a public university, but certainly cost is one of them. So I did an analysis, a correlational analysis, going back from the fall of 2002, and looked at whether or not the actual enrollment rates of students was correlated to tuition. And I modeled tuition in three different ways. Actual tuition, tuition increases in dollar amounts from the year before, and tuition percentage increases from the year before. And I see no correlational relationship between tuition increases at institutions statewide and student enrollment decisions. And I break this down into the three ethnic groups among white students, African American, and Hispanic. That's the short summary of what we've done. Now, I have seen since 2003 a slight decrease in the number of Hispanic students who are accepted in public four-year institution who actually end up enrolling. I see that a slight uptick in those percentage of those students who actually go into a two-year school. So there seems to be something maybe going on there, but I don't see any statistical relationship between those decisions and actual tuition. Something else is happening. So one thing that I would like to stress is that all these three strands of analyses are preliminary and far from conclusive. However, it is notable that in none of the three do I find any evidence that would be consistent with an increase in cost effect. So that suggests that institutions are effectively allocating the additional revenue for tuition offsets for students who need them. I will say that there's a tremendous need for a more in-depth analysis in looking at the enrollment decisions of students. There's also a need looking at completion information, whether or not tuition increases affect completion. And again, this would be a subject of a more intensive long-term analysis that we're undergoing.
I would add to the last point that Susan's staff has at least looked at those people leaving higher education. She's not found any change in the mix of students leaving. You don't have more low-income students leaving than previously. You don't have more of any ethnic group leaving than previously. So it's that's a more descriptive type of analysis than what Lee's doing. But I can say that same type of analysis, suggested what Lee just told you before, that we weren't seeing an effect. So I expect we're going to find that same thing, at least in the short term. The issue that we've never understood and nobody understands is what about students who never apply to college and the impact on those? Because what Lee's talking about is a population of all those students who applied to college to begin with, and nobody has gotten a sufficient handle on sticker shock, which is, do they look at the amount of dollars and not apply at all? And we know nothing about those students because they're not in a database.
That's exactly right. And actually what I should say in that third strand, where I look at the enrollment decisions of students who are accepted, that's of all students who apply to four-year institutions. That's not of Texas Public High School grads. So the first two strands are of Texas Public High School grads. The last analysis is the broader set of students who are coming to universities. So I thought it would be good to get a mix, looking at the two different populations and see if we can find anything. But there doesn't seem to be. And I also would like to say that, what we see since 2003 is essentially flat lines. We don't see changes in enrollment rates or application rates. Yes.
It is true that we have a higher percentage of students going directly from high school into college over that time period than we did at the beginning.
The enrollment rates...
we have a higher percentage of high school graduates going directly into college. We have a direct match 1-to-1, so we just need to clarify that.
Well, it's increases slightly, but it's not increasing very rapidly.
No, it's not increasing rapidly.
Right, it's increasing slightly. What I would like to say is that, from a research perspective, one of the questions that you ask is, what would have happened in the event that there were not rapid increases in tuition? Right? I mean, would these relatively flat lines have actually gone up? And that's something we don't know. And I think that in order to get to those kinds of questions, that again requires more of a surveys of students to try to get inside the heads of what they're thinking and to get at why is it how do they explain their behaviors. And that will be a part of this long-term research effort that I've discussed briefly, I've mentioned.
Members?
In the calculation of the rate, does that take into account the growth and the demographics of the population that is eligible to apply?
You talking about in terms of whether they were eligible in terms of their academic performance while in high school?
Not necessarily, just the pool of kids. In other words, understand our state demographics. The youngest population is the biggest right now,
right.
And so as that growth is sustained or continues, shouldn't the rate actually go up? So when we were saying a flat line of application rates, is it not very good because that population is growing?
Well, what I do is essentially I take the percentage of each subpopulation.
Okay.
Okay, so it is true that you've got a larger percentage of the graduates, for example, from high school who are minority, low income. And what I look at is that population, so the percentage of
The rate
of Hispanics who enroll or apply. And it's that rate that is essentially constant over time.
And we also have had the number of high school graduates has been flat over the last several years, so we have not had an increase in high school graduates over this recent time period.
That's actually an important point, that what I've tried to do is account for the changing demographics by looking at each subpopulation in and of itself.
But it's the subpopulation in the first two strands is high school graduates.
Yeah.
So
those are high school graduates. So that's more of a pipeline issue.
yeah, or a hole in the pipeline issue, as the case may be.
One thing that I would like to say is that whenever you get into data, you run across a lot of interesting results that you didn't anticipate, and you write down as certainly on the agenda for things to look into more carefully. And one of the things I would like to talk about is the percentage of this is looking at applicants who come to universities. This is not of Texas Public High School graduates. Of the students who apply and are accepted into a Texas Public High School, to a Texas Public University, approximately 10% of the white students don't show up anywhere. They don't show up in a 4-year university. They don't show up in a Texas public 2-year university. That's the same true. It's about the same rate as Hispanics. It's a little bit higher for Hispanic. But for African Americans, since 2002, it's been consistently at about 33%. It's a remarkable difference. That's that kind of difference that argues for a very specific research agenda trying to explain that differential. And that's going to be a high priority.
There's certain contextual things that aren't accounted for. For example, the peak in 2002 is when the Texas control became the most effective in Hopwood. There's a hurricane in the later years. We have TSU. That's what makes me think of it. Had a huge downturn in terms of enrollment, and a high percentage of the African American population, higher than you'd like, resides in about 5 institutions. And so just that drop of 2,000 or 3,000 students at TSU has a large impact on that analysis, I think.
But what makes it remarkable is that throughout time, it's been very consistent at 33%, and it's been amazingly durable. As a researcher, whenever you see something that's durable and that different from the rest of the demographic subgroups, it warrants further investigation.
But you're saying there's no way to know whether the cost of tuition is responsible for the no-shows?
Well, what we can do is we can do an analysis looking at the cost as reflected in the coordinating board data. The actual cost data, don't include a lot of, the private loans that students get. There's a lot of information not included in that. I think it's worthwhile doing an analysis looking at the actual cost factors that we have and seeing what kind of relationships that we come up with. But we have to be very careful in interpreting them, because we know there's a lot of sources of revenue that aren't going to be included in those costs in the actual cost factor. So I think it's worth going down that road. It's worth again trying to get inside the heads of students and the decisions that they're making, try and get a closer look. And in regards to the African American population, one of the things that we'd certainly like to do is determine whether or not they're going into the Texas labor market. And perhaps with Texas Workforce Commission data, we can do that. Determine whether or not they stay in state, and if so, if they're still working. So that would help inform what's happening as well.
I'm going to ask a really dumb question, so I want to tell the members of the audience who don't know me that I went to school as long as you could go to school. But I still have to ask this. Don't we want to keep tuition low in general? Wouldn't that be our common sense thought, that if we can keep tuition costs down, we could get more students to go to college? I mean,
well, there's a distinction.
I don't want to insult your research, but I don't understand really how we can use it.
Well, there's a distinction between tuition that I have in my data. I mean, that's the average tuition for 15 semester credit hours that I use. Mm-hmm. That's charged to, maybe not all students across the board, but it's the average for the university, mm-hmm. right? There's a distinction between the tuition revenue charged and the actual cost that students actually have to pay.
Sure.
And that's what I'm trying to get at here is, it is the case that costs that students see affect their behavior. That's what the lit review that I've commissioned on that very question shows. Costs that students have to pay. The higher the cost, the less likely they are to enroll, and that's especially true for low-income and minority students. So that's a critical factor. The question here is since 2003, when institutions have been given the liberty to increase their tuitions, have they effectively reallocated the additional revenue towards those student populations so that it doesn't translate into an off-putting cost that would affect their behavior?
Yeah, I see the point you're making. Mm-hmm. Any other?
And that's what we don't see any evidence of. Is that?
Yeah.
So that suggests institutions have been. Now, I should say, I have done some looking at specific institutions and looking at changes in tuition over time, and looking at enrollment rates of accepted students over time. And looking at specific institutions, there are some institutions where there does seem to be a relationship. there's been, over time, an increase in tuitions and a decrease in the enrollment rates of accepted students, especially for minority populations, okay? So for that institution, that might indicate that they're not being as effective at reallocating additional revenues than perhaps other institutions.
Did you take into account changes in admission policies?
No,
for
sir.
certain institutions?
I do not. And so that's a very good point. There's a lot that isn't accounted for here. But when I look at the issue statewide and whether or not there's any sort of correlation, we don't seem to see one. Okay.
Does the data at all suggest, or do we have an idea of like a threshold where there'd be a tipping point
The answer to your question
where it would
is
negatively impact tuition increases?
the answer to your question is no. I don't have an idea if there is a tipping point, but that's a very good question, and that is on the table for what we'll be looking at. And is the tipping point different for different populations?
Right.
Absolutely.
Well, it's also clear that the tipping point's different for different institutions.
Right. That's an institution specific.
Yeah.
There, in sort of economic terms, it's called, sort of elasticity, right? I mean, how sensitive are students to increases?
Right.
And that may be different depending upon where you are. If you're, if your tuition is $5, 100% increase isn't going to affect behavior as if your tuition is $5,000 and increase another $1,000 or $10,000 to $10,000.
Right.
So it's different depending upon where it may be different depending upon where you are on that tuition cost continuum.
Right. Well, and how close to that ceiling are we?
Good question.
David, is this a reallocation of additional revenues so as to avoid a negative impact on student enrollment anywhere on any of our accountability measures?
No, and I've not really heard that discussed in terms of tuition increases, is that the dollars were intended to go for any particular purpose. I think it's an interesting point, but I haven't. Perhaps McGregor has, but I think the tuition increases were discussed more in the terms of overall funding to institutions and needs for additional faculty and other resources that weren't being met by formula needs. It's an interesting thought. But recall that part of that money is allocated into a fund for students who do have need. It's part of that 20% of that tuition increase is for, and I think McGregor's about to say more about that, but that's generated a considerable amount of money.
And all the institutions are statutorily required to set aside 20%, 15% for general financial aid, and then 5% for the Be On Time loan program. And I know that several of the institutions have actually put aside more than that, more than the 20% mandated by statute. So they're, for each price increase you're also seeing an increase in financial aid, which plays into the elasticity question and whether or not there is more flexibility in what the students can afford to pay, because as was said, the actual sticker price to the student is very different than what the base tuition and fee cost is, which is the generic use that we've put it to.
So in that sense, that they did address the need part. I was assuming more in terms of Lee's statement, in terms of perhaps support for other risk factors besides need, in terms of academic assistance or in some cases daycare.
I have a question, if I may, Madam Chairman. This has been a very interesting discussion, Doctor, but I've got a question. Have you can probably answer this yes or no, given any thought to the impact of the recession on how we're going to go forward? I know what we're talking about with tuitions and so forth, but what about funds available and capability of getting at those funds to try to keep the numbers of students up and coming to school? And I don't have a clue as to where that would go, but I know that when you're looking at endowments and some of these universities dropping 30, 40%, and not the least of which is my own, and it's a conundrum to me as to how do we plan for the future, regardless of all of our historical documents and the way we can examine all these things. I just don't know what the track forward is going to look like. And I would hope that some of the great minds in this organization and in this country will start to address that sooner rather than later.
The effects of the recession are two different, in general terms, two different and opposing directions. And it can be very difficult to disentangle them. But the first is that you mentioned is the effect on endowments, okay, which of course affects the institution's ability to provide financial aid. Okay, so that it all depends again upon institutional response. How does the specific institution handle the decrease in endowments? Do they increase the percentage of principal that they're going to draw down on, or not? Or do they change how they target the funds that they do decide to draw upon towards students? That could very well affect what we see here. The other effect that I mentioned is, generally speaking, your propensity to enroll in higher ed goes in the opposite direction in your economy. So students, generally speaking, are more likely to go on and continue education if the opportunity costs of doing so decrease. In other words, if they can make less money in the labor market. Okay. So, for example, one of the classic example is before the .com bust, you had a lot of students in high school learning how to build websites, and they were being diverted away from higher ed because they were making $100,000 a year based upon the skills that they learned in high school. Okay. Well, after the .com bust, those students were much more likely to go ahead and continue on into higher ed. So your higher ed enrollment rates would go up for those students, for those types of students.
You see, one of the things that bothers me is I look at the unemployment figures that come out every few days, and that we're getting very close to double-digit unemployment. And those kinds of factors have got to have some impact, negative impact, on how we look and address our business today. As I read about the University of Texas had gone into their endowment fund and taken some money out so that they could, as I understood it at the time, to help more kids come into school, or help the kids that came into school that were more needy have available funds to them from that source. Well, now I look back and I say, well, okay, if 40–50% of that fund has disappeared through this recession, that's got to knock that in the head. So that they probably can't go forward with that. But that's just one. Then I read the other day that Harvard has lost so much money, and they were so heavily endowed, that they're in a real bind. And I mean, those are just a couple that come to mind, but if you sit back and look at this whole thing from 30,000 feet, it seems to me we're going to have to make some assumptions sooner rather than later. And assumptions are always hard to make. They're easy to make, but hard to make them accurate. As to, what impact is this going to have on us if it lasts 6 months, if it lasts 12 months or 18 months? It seems to me this is going to scramble the deck quite dramatically. I just don't know what the answer to it is, and I don't expect you to know it right now either. But
well, I can make a couple of guesses.
Certainly an area of concern I think we need to pay attention to.
I mean, David and McGregor would know probably more about this than I do, but I would guess that, thinking about the endowment effect, I think that the endowment effect is going to be more of a factor at UT and A&M in the emerging research, less so in the emerging research universities that have higher endowments, that actually use those endowments to transfer to financial aid. I'm not aware of what the endowments are at the other public universities, but my guess is that those institutions rely less upon their endowments for student financial aid than do UT and A&M, for example. So I would welcome comment.
That's exactly right. In fact, I was looking to see if I could find it, because when you get outside of UT and A&M's endowments are at least 10 times that of Texas Tech and Houston, for example. Their endowments, I'm not sure where UT Dallas fits in, there's probably about there, but those endowments are probably about 10 times those of the next institutions. I wish we had more of an issue with endowments for most of our schools. I think whatever endowments they have are important to them, and any loss is critical, especially when you don't have many. But unfortunately, our institutions are not highly endowed. Is that fair? Do you have much of an endowment at Corpus? Well, you guys do because of the Marine. What do you have? 70 million?
I think that your comment about the 30,000-foot view is a good one, but at the same time, what we need to do is get a feel for how specific institutions are responding, and that's going to be a real focus of how the institute is going to move forward.
Well, I use the example of the endowment just as a for instance. I mean, obviously what David said is right. There's a lot more to it than that. In fact, that's the thing that I'm worried about, is there is so much more to it than that we have to address. And I know we've got a retreat coming up here before very long where we're going to discuss a lot of planning type issues. It seems to me this is one we need to start making some headway towards determining what the assumptions are that we're going to be working with for the future. And that's all. And I don't expect you to answer it now. Or if somewhere along the way at another meeting, we're going to ask the same question again and see if you've done anything.
Since some of you have to leave, why don't we go back to this at the end and finish our discussion so that we can make sure we have a quorum here for votes? Can you hang around, Lee, or come back?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Item 4A is, item 4 has several things, first of which is the consideration of adopting the staff recommendation relating to statutory 4-year review of degree programs, mission statements, and table of programs for the following institutions: Angelo State University, Sul Ross State University, Sul Ross State University Rio Grande College, Texas A&M International University, and the University of North Texas. Since we're short on time, members, if it's all right with everyone, we'll ask McGregor to summarize these and vote on them all together, unless we have to, the discussion leads us another direction. Is that all right to everybody?
Yes.
Okay, McGregor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, this is the standard 4-year cycle that we go through and look at the mission statement table programs. These are the mission statements for these 5 institutions. The only one that has any revisions to it is Angelo State. You'll recall that they've switched to the Texas Tech University system after last session, and so this is their first revision since that time, and they are the only ones that are showing a significant revision. So that is all of my presentation, and it is within the parameters of where it was before. Excuse me.
Members, you've heard the recommendation. Do I have a motion?
So moved. Second?
Moved by Ms. Bricker, seconded by Ms. Mendoza. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Item 4B is the consideration of adopting the staff recommendation regarding the preliminary authority request. McGregor, can you take us through these?
Yes, ma'am. The first item is at Angelo State University, where they are requesting preliminary authority for a food and animal science and marketing degree. This program was something that is showing demand in their area, and that they feel like would be beneficial to them if they were able to spend some time and invest in preparing a proposal for this program. Sam Houston State University is asking for preliminary authority on an instructional technology doctoral program, and this is to help prepare faculty and instructors in the use of distance education so that we can expand the use of distance education at the professional level and provide more opportunities for faculty to take those type of courses. They are also requesting a doctoral level school psychology. This is one of the areas that has very strong demand statewide, where there is a high need for doctorally trained psychologists and counselors at the schools. And so this program is also recommended to move forward with preliminary authority. Texas State University San Marcos has answered the Commissioner's request for the development of doctoral level developmental education programs. This is a situation as we're moving forward, we're trying to develop a better mechanism to evaluate how we show the need and the demand for these type of programs other than empirically and anecdotally. We know that there is a need to look for better best practices. We know that there is significant growth in developmental education programs, and that having these type of programs will be beneficial. We're just trying to look at some of the metrics as we're moving forward, but we do recommend moving forward on the developmental education at San Marcos. Also, and finally, the environmental science at the baccalaureate level for the University of Texas at Arlington. This is a program that fits in with their existing science programs and will give them another outlet for students interested in physical sciences. And we do recommend approval for that as well.
Thank you, McGregor. Any comments? Ms. Ricker?
Yeah, is there a developmental education doctoral level at other universities currently? This is the first?
This would be the first in the state. I believe that the source that we use in looking outside the state, Grambling State University actually has a very good program that's been in existence for about 20 years. And that was one of the programs that we used to evaluate and kind of look to see where they were headed and what type of things we should be interested in looking at when we're doing the review.
Thanks.
Any other comments? Is there any emphasis on bilingual candidates in the school psychology doctorate program?
I'm going to have to, in the school psychology one? Mm-hmm. I don't believe so. That was more on the direct counseling and clinical side.
Oh, all right.
If I'm correct on that, yes.
Okay. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Ricker.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Hinton. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. Agenda item 4C is the consideration of adopting a staff recommendation relating to requests for new degree programs. Item 4C1 is a request from Texas A&M University and Texas A&M University System Health Science Center for authority to offer a joint Master of Science degree and joint Doctor of Philosophy degree with a major in neuroscience. McGregor?
Thank you. The staff recommendation is to approve the authorization to create this joint program between the Health Science Center and Texas A&M University main campus in College Station. The neuroscience degree does show that there is a significant demand in the area for this program, and that there is an outstanding opportunity for the collaboration between the Health Science Center and Texas A&M University. I believe that Dr. Jeff Fitter, who's the provost at Texas A&M University, is here and can answer questions if there are any, as are several of his staff members, if you have any specific questions. But the way this would work would be they would students who are admitted would have to be admitted to both the Health Science Center and the university in their graduate programs, and they would receive a degree with both institutions' names on it. So it would be Texas A&M University and the Texas A&M University Health Science Center on the diploma, and so it would be a true joint program.
Very interesting. Any comments, questions, members? Okay, you've heard the recommendation. Do I have a motion?
Motion.
Motion made by Mr. Hinton. Second by Ms. Ricker. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. Congratulations. Item 4C2 is from Texas A&M University Commerce and Texas A&M University Texarkana for authority to offer a Step 2 Cooperative Doctor of Education degree with a major in Educational Administration. McGregor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I apologize. Dr. Moore was here from Texas State University San Marcos, and I didn't recognize him while he was in the back there. Thank you. This is a joint, a Step 2 Doctoral of Education in Educational Administration between Texas A&M Commerce and Texarkana. They have had a long-standing relationship between the two institutions and have done a lot of work together. There is a demand in the region for this type of program, and they will be offering courses in 3 different locations. As I recall, sorry, I lost train there for a second. This program will be one that provides opportunities for A&M Texarkana to offer courses in the degree program, while A&M Commerce provides the foundation of the program and actually offers the degrees. So the degree will be from A&M Commerce, but it gives the opportunity for Texarkana to develop their courses and programs and faculty, and give their faculty opportunities to gain experience sitting on dissertation committees and those type of things, and giving access to the program there in Texarkana and at the center. And so we do recommend that this Step 2 doctoral program be approved between A&M Texarkana and A&M Commerce. And Dr. Rosanna Stripling is here as well from A&M Texarkana if there are questions or...
Do it.
Any questions?
Yeah.
comments? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Ms. Mendoza, seconded by Ms. Ricker. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. Item 4C3 is from Texas A&M University Corpus Christi for authority to offer a Bachelor of Science degree with a major in mechanical engineering. McGregor?
Thank you. This is the final approval for the Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering. This is a program that has been developed very closely with A&M Corpus Christi. They are working on forming the Engineering Alliance and Hispanic Serving Institution program to address 7 to 12 grade pipeline issues for bringing more students into the STEM fields and especially into beginning engineering programs in South Texas. This was an initiative that they put together in response to some of the questions that were raised with regard to this program. They have shown that there is a workforce demand for engineering students and that they are developing the pipeline to enable them to better expand the existing number of students going into engineering programs. For that reason, the recommendation of the staff is approval for the program.
If I might add just one thing, we're looking at a 2+2 program for mechanical engineering with essentially a common statewide curriculum for community colleges. And if this is approved, A&M Corpus Christi is one of the 14 schools that would offer this mechanical engineering program that have volunteered to step up and make that happen.
And I'm sorry, Dr. Flavius Killebrew from Texas A&M Corpus Christi is here as well and can answer questions if there are any.
I just wanted to comment that if we could keep measuring the success of this, proving the point, reaching back to the 7th grade, I think that's going to be pretty important.
Absolutely.
So we really want to keep visibility into this innovation and recruitment, so please do.
Yeah, we sure do. We're really excited about this. Okay. Do I have a motion? Second by Ms. Ricker, second by Ms. Mendoza. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for coming. Members, I just want to point out to you, I don't know if this is the first time, but we have our accountability measures accompanying our program requests. And this is a big step forward for us.
Yeah.
We appreciate that, staff.
Good.
Next item, 4C4, is from Texas Tech University Health Sciences Center for authority to offer a Doctor of Philosophy degree with a major in Rehabilitation Sciences. McGregor?
Thank you. This Doctor of Philosophy in Rehabilitation Sciences is predicated on the existence of a shortage of qualified faculty to teach rehabilitation science programs across the country. There is an existing PhD program in rehabilitation science, but it is focused more on the clinical aspects rather than the teaching aspects here in Texas. And so this program is being designed to build up on the faculty side, since there are going to be significant retirements in this area and there is a rising demand for this type of field with the aging of the population and the need for these type of trained professionals. For that reason, the staff does recommend a positive recommendation and approval of the program for Texas Tech University Health Science Center. And I know that there was a couple of the folks here from the Self Science Center, if there are any questions.
Good. Get ready to take care of all us baby boomers. We're coming on. Okay, do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Ms. Mendoza, seconded by Ms. Bricker. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Thank
Thank you, Dr. James. Appreciate it.
4D is consideration of adopting the staff recommendation certifying that Texas A&M University Kingsville System Center San Antonio, Tarleton State University System Center Central Texas, and University of North Texas System Center Dallas have met the legislatively established minimum threshold of full-time student equivalents. McGregor?
Thank you very much, members, Madam Chair and members. This is actually the next step in the process of these institutions becoming independent standalone entities. Once they reached the 1,000 FTE threshold, they were able to request certification from the coordinating board. And so we are taking this step of moving forward with the 1,000 FTE recognition for each of these entities and bringing to you their numbers, which for Texas A&M University San Antonio was 1,035. For North Texas State University System North Texas System Center, Dallas. Sorry, John. 1003. And Dr. John Price from North Texas System Center in Dallas is here as well. And then for Tarleton State University System Center, Central Texas, the count was 1,204. And so all of them have exceeded that. So from that perspective, we are simply certifying the numbers as they are in front of you and recommending that to the full board so that they can approve that, and then the individual institutions and their boards can take whatever action they deem appropriate.
Great. Do I have a motion?
And if I may, offer my congratulations to those system centers for
Yes.
making the mark at this point. So,
Congratulations. Moved by Mr. Hinton, seconded by Ms. Mendoza. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Congratulations. Item 4E, consideration of adopting the staff recommendation relating to a request from Texas A&M University, Corpus Christi to change the degree designation of its existing Doctor of Education in Curriculum and Instruction to a Doctor of Philosophy in Curriculum and Instruction. McGregor?
thank you very much. This item was actually sent out for an external review, and we had the good fortune of having a member of the University of Wisconsin-Madison, Dr. Elizabeth Groh, come in. Actually, she did a desk review and reviewed all the programs and the type of research that was being conducted within the program, and made the recommendation that this actually could serve as a PhD program. They did make the chain recommendation based upon the understanding that C&I, with concentrations in literacy studies and curriculum studies, would include curriculum. Curriculum is research focused and provides greater flexibility to meet the demand of an expanding job market, that the core faculty are appropriately engaged in research activities consistent with doctoral study leading to the PhD, that students would continue to be directed in conducting research aims to develop and contribute to the knowledge base rather than the practitioner research that generally typifies the EDD-focused inquiries, and that there are no additional costs to the institution or the state for the REVISE program, and this is something that's been discussed previously. So with these recommendations and items in mind, we do recommend approval to make the change from the EDD to the PhD.
Ms. Grieger?
Do most universities in Texas that offer doctorates in education, do most of them have EDDs, or and can they have both, or do they have one or the other? How does that work?
They could actually offer both. There are several institutions that do offer both. Typically, if they are practitioner, they're going to be focused more primarily on the practitioner focused rather than the research focused.
It would be an EDD.
It would be the EDD, and the goal with the Corpus program is for it to be more of a research based and research focused program rather than practitioner focused.
Okay.
And that's why the focus in terms of the approval recommendation was made the way it was to clarify that differentiation. Is that fair?
Thanks. I see a dissertation coming. I feel it. From your 7th through 12th grade engineering outreach program.
Good point.
Yeah. All right. Do I have a motion?
Motion.
Second. Motion made by Mr. Hinton, seconded by Ms. Mendoza. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Congratulations.
Congrats.
Item 4F, consideration of adopting the staff recommendation relating to Weatherford College to designate the teaching center located in Wise County as a branch campus. McGregor?
Thank you very much. For the past 8.5 years, the Weatherford College has been offering classes, board-approved classes, in Decatur and Wise County. And at the January 2007 meeting, the board approved a request to hold a branch campus maintenance tax election in Wise County. The election was held November 4th in 2008, and the maintenance tax referendum was passed. The court has been authorized by passage of the maintenance tax offer to levy the tax for the 2009 year. However, it will not actually levy the tax until September. Weatherford currently serves 957 students in Wise County and would like to take this step to allow them to have a designated teaching center there in Wise County and not just a separate, as a branch campus, not just a separate teaching center, and have that recognition made permanent. And so the staff recommends approval to the board.
Excellent. Welcome, Commissioner.
And we have a representative from the institution if you have any questions.
So this is I like all these consumer-oriented, user-friendly moves we're making here.
Need a motion?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I made it.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Hinton, seconded by Ms. Bricker. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. All of you in the audience know Commissioner Paredes, who has joined us, and I'm sure he's happy to be here.
I am.
Could be anywhere.
Anywhere but where I was.
On the road, right?
Right.
Right.
This broadcast, I was on the road.
Okay, I guess we'll get through our voting items before we ask you for an update on how it's going. Agenda item 4G is consideration of adopting the staff recommendation relating to revisions to the 3 Associate of Arts in Teaching curricula intended for transfer to baccalaureate programs that lead to initial Texas teacher certification. Okay, McGregor, see if you can say it.
I can say James Goen. That's usually how I try to talk about Associate of Applied Teaching, but Associate of Arts in Teaching. See, I did screw it up. But in any case, these programs were in need of updating after SBEC changed the certification requirements. In order to keep the AAT as a functioning instrument for us, we needed to make some revisions. The primary purpose of this was there were too many hours of education courses that were being included into the AAT degree, and those hours were not matching with what could be offered at the university level. And so we made some significant revisions to the program, one of which at the EC6 level, which used to be EC4. At the EC6 level, there were changes from TECA classes, which were education courses, to EDUC courses. And these EDUC courses are identical to the ones that have been in use for the other 2 AAT programs, the 4 through 8 and the secondary programs for the last 4 years, or I guess it's 5 years now since 2004. Since we last implemented them. So they're not brand new classes, they are ones that have been in existence. There is a question on the EC6 program for the AAT that we just got in last week and we're trying to follow up on, in that whether or not 2 of the 100, there's one 100 level education course and one 200 level education course in this AAT program. And a question was raised by an institution as to whether or not those 100 and 200 level courses would actually transfer into a degree program, into the hours required for an interdisciplinary studies degree, simply because at the university level, the only education courses that can be offered are 300 and 400 level courses. And so we are in the process of surveying all of the institutions, the deans of the colleges of education, to evaluate whether or not these education courses in the 100 and 200 level level are being accepted into the degree program, or whether they're being accepted in as elective credit, or whether they're not being accepted. If they're not being accepted, then we need to take another look at this at the EC6 level and to evaluate whether or not this is really, whether the AAT is truly an effective model for us to use, or whether we're better off just giving the students the full core curriculum, which is basically what we've done, giving them the core curriculum with a couple of extra education courses, and to reevaluate that. But what I would like to do at this point, we will have a better answer for the board next month when we have our board meeting. And so what I would like to suggest is that we go ahead and approve all 3 of the AAT programs of study and take it back up at the board meeting. And if there needs to be a revision to the AAT for the EC6, at that point in time, I will ask you to table that until we have an opportunity to do some further work on it. And so, but at this point, I would ask for approval for all 3 of the AAT fields of study.
Thank you. Comments or questions? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Ricker.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Hinton. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. Agenda item 4H is consideration of adopting the staff recommendation relating to the National Association of Schools of Theater being recognized as an accrediting agency in Texas. McGregor?
sorry, I skipped one. The NAST has been an accrediting body since 1982. It was founded in 1965 to improve educational practices and has also been recognized by the Council on Higher Education Accreditation and is a member of the Association of Specialized and Professional Accreditors. NAST currently accredits 150 institutions in the United States. 8 of those are in Texas. And this is going to become our 8th, would become our 8th nationally recognized national accreditor that the board would recognize. And the staff does recommend approval as they meet all of the criteria for recognition under the board's rules.
More user-friendly work here. Any questions, comments? Do I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Motion made by Ms. Bricker, seconded by Ms. Mendoza. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Item 4I is consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation relating to a request from Texas College of Traditional Chinese Medicine for a certificate of authority to grant degrees in Texas. Gregor?
Thank you. This is listed as a pending recommendation. As of Friday, the Commissioner did recommend approval of the certificate of authority to the board based upon the site visit that was conducted on February 23rd and 24th. The site visit team gave a positive recommendation, and the Certification Advisory Council unanimously recommended recertification of the Texas College of Traditional Chinese Medicine, and the staff also recommends to approve based upon the Commissioner's recommendation.
Any discussion, comments? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Hinton, seconded by Ms. Mendoza. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Okay. Agenda item 5, it will be a discussion of the programmatic aspects of funding items on the Agency Operations Committee agenda. It's not an action item.
Amen.
McGregor, you want to discuss these with
Surely.
us?
These are just informational items. We will be taking the actual action items to the Agency Operations Committee. First is Minority Health Research and Education Grant Programs for 2010-11. We do them on biennial cycles to allow the grants to function over a longer period of time and hopefully have a little more continuity. These programs were paid for out of the tobacco settlement funds and are provided in order to increase students either in the health and health pipelines or to improve health research on minority groups. Also, the nursing, allied health, and other health-related education grants are also multi-state tobacco settlement funds, and these funds are used for a variety of purposes to improve health-related and allied health programs across the state and to improve on closing the gaps goals. And just for your information, the nursing allied health is $4.05 million, and the minority health research and education grants are approximately $2.25 million for the biennium. So a little over $1 million for one a year and $2 million for the other for the year.
Any discussion? Okay. Go on to the Carl Perkins.
Okay. The Carl Perkins reallocation of leadership funds. These were unused funds from across the state that we pulled together. We had included a project to Midland College in the amount of $100,000 for the workforce education course manual, the WECM maintenance project. At the January 9th meeting, we approved the reallocation of the carryover funds, and a portion, $200,000 of these funds were set aside in anticipation of another WECM project. This project amendment is a request for funding to support additional course review for WECM in May and June of 2009. These allow groups of faculty in the disciplines for the courses to come together and work on identifying and ensuring that the quality of the courses and the content of the courses is relatively consistent across institutions, and that it's also meeting the demands for which it's established. And they do these on a regular basis, and it also gives better transferability among institutions when there is this review of the curriculum and content. This would actually amend the original workshop, and the amount to be awarded for the additional workshops is $45,000. It was more than 10% of the original grant amount, so it had to come back to the board for approval.
But we don't need to take any action here.
No, ma'am. I'm sorry. It's just an information item that we'll take to the other.
Agenda item 6 is various staff updates on their activities and projects, and the first is Chris Fowler will discuss a strategic plan for the state of Texas to meet nursing workforce needs of 2013. Hi, Chris.
Hi. I'm going to be talking from a handout that you should have at your place, item number 6. The line graph on the first page you may have seen before. It was included in our Projecting the Needs study, and it shows the projected gap between the supply and demand for nurses in the state through 2020. And not surprisingly, many other states have similar predicted shortages, so much so that it prompted some major national policymakers, AARP, Robert Woods Johnson Foundation, the U.S. Department of Labor, to organize a national summit on nursing in Washington last August. Texas was one of 18 states represented in this first nursing summit, and I represented the coordinating board on the state's 10-member team. There were a lot of good ideas from the summit, but the marching orders coming out of that summit were go back and develop a strategic plan for meeting the state's projected need for nurses. And this handout, the second page, summarizes a 19-page strategic plan that the Texas team developed. And there are 3 major goals of the plan: support growth and accountability in the state's nursing schools, develop partnerships among nursing schools to maximize scarce resources, and third, leverage educational efforts with new schools, hospitals, and other federal and state resources. Under those 3 goals are 12 strategies, and you'll note Coordinating Board is the lead or support agency on 6 of those strategies. Those are the starred items. And looking at the strategies, many of them should be familiar to you. They were recommendations in a number of the board's reports to this current legislative session. So as part of the plan, the board would be doing the strategy 1.2. They would be establishing graduation targets for individual institutions. That was a recommendation in the board's Projecting the Needs study. Strategy 1.3, calculate graduation rates and promote best practices. We're already doing that through a program that's currently in our rules that recognize nursing schools with graduation rates of 85% or better. Strategy number 2.1, support new curriculum models. You'll recall that the board prepared a report advocating for more standardized nursing curriculum for this legislative session. 2.3, the board will create regional interdisciplinary clinical simulation centers. That's a favorite of the governor's, and that's a mouthful, but what it really means is the new wave in most health education is to work with high-fidelity mannequins that mimic responses to drug interactions, procedures that mimic human beings, and it will potentially reduce the number of clinical hours we'll have at actual sites like hospitals and clinics. And the bad side of that is they're expensive, and a lot of these institutions are building their own clinical simulation centers, one on top of each other. So there are states that are trying to streamline and centralize and share those functions to reduce the costs of the state. That's a fairly new one that you haven't really seen. Strategy 2.4, the board would work with other nursing groups to coordinate clinical scheduling and other systems for nursing schools to share common administrative functions. Again, we're doing that through some of our grants through the Nursing Innovation Grant Program. The strategic plan has since been approved by the summit sponsors. That's a good thing because then we have an advantage in soliciting grant monies from these organizations. The plan has also been endorsed by a number of organizations, including the Texas Nurses Association, Texas Hospital Association, Texas State Department of Health, and the Texas Workforce Commission. The Texas team, again, I'm a member of that team, will continue to meet and monitor progress on implementing the plan. Any questions?
Just refresh my memory here on the when we're talking about a strategic plan to meet nursing workforce needs.
Yes.
What does that mean? Is that I know there's a lot of RN here that which would indicate a baccalaureate.
Yes, it's associate and baccalaureate nurses. When we talk about new nurses, it's at the lowest level of a registered nurse,
which is a 2-year?
A 2-year or a 4-year program at a community college or university.
Okay, so is there any indication, or do y'all differentiate between what do we need more of?
Well, that's kind of a political question. We currently produce about 60% associate and 40% baccalaureate. And some people believe that we should be turning those proportions around. There have been studies showing higher mortality rates, for example, with associate degree nurses. Some people dispute those findings in that research, so there's an ongoing dispute over the value of that research and whether it's a good deal for the state to be continuing to produce associate or baccalaureate degrees in whatever proportion. So at this point, the predominant level of degree is at the associate degree level.
And we're not making a recommendation either way at this time. That's right.
Just curious.
What is the title of an associate degree nurse?
Registered nurse.
Registered nurse. Is embedded in here somewhere some sort of program to encourage LVNs to become RNs?
Yeah.
Well, that was included in our curriculum model recommendations to the legislature. Right now, we don't feel that there's a strong enough pipeline between LVN and RN instruction. And so we're interested in streamlining the instruction through more standardization of nursing curriculum in order to do that. But there is an enormous amount of potential in that.
Yeah, we know where they are and we can recruit them, and if we can make it easier for them to get their degrees.
Yes. Laura?
Chris, going back to 1.3, the graduation rates, it's been brought to my attention that there's money set aside for institutions with certain graduation rates, but that the coordinating board as an agency is recalculating to see, evidently they had calculated differently. I'm not going to say right or wrong, but differently. Can you speak to that?
Well, a nursing coalition has made a proposal to the legislature which would fund nursing programs based on whether they have graduation rates above the 2007 average for graduation rates or below it. Schools that are above the 2007 graduation rate would receive a line item appropriation with not too many strings attached in order to use those monies to build capacity and graduate more students from their program. The students below the 70% would have to enter an MOU with the coordinating board, and there would be benchmarks and certain targets that they would have to meet in order to continue to receive money from the coordinating board. Naturally, people want to be in the 70-plus category to get a line item appropriation. We are in the process, probably by tomorrow, to be able to provide the legislature with 2008 graduation rates. It uses the same methodology that we use for the 2007 graduation rates, although there is some controversy at this point in this new calculation. I have to say that we've not used this calculation, but in the last 6 months, we calculated the 2007 graduation rates. Now we're on to 2008. A lot of times we have to work out some bugs in that process before we feel totally comfortable with the methodology that we're using. But the methodology is in rule, and it says that we calculate a 1-year program based on 18 months from entry to completion, and a 2-year program, that would be the LV and RN, by the way, a 2-year program, which would be an associate degree or a bachelor's degree as they enter the nursing curriculum for 36 months, which is basically 150% time to completion for a normal 2-year program. There are some nursing programs that are longer than 2 years, but we're still measuring their completion rate at 36 months.
And so by the 2007 calculation, were most of the institutions above the 70%, or how did that?
No, I would say, well, I haven't looked at those numbers for a while, but I would say more than a third, but not a half, certainly. Okay. There are some schools that are very, very low based on our calculations.
And based on the ones that you're going to be getting, the 2008, do you think that there'll be a trend that more than 30% or up to 1/2 would have a 70% graduation rate? Or is that 70% number going to change?
Well, we haven't finalized that data yet, but it looks as though there haven't been many changes. So I think we could be a few percentage points higher or lower. Again, I haven't seen the final numbers yet, but I believe that it will probably stay about the same.
39 schools, it appears, were above the 69%, 70% or more.
Okay.
Out of 84 programs?
94?
94 programs.
39 out of 94?
Actually, 36. I was
36.
looking at 36 of them, yeah.
36 out of 94.
Not all the schools participated, I should say, from that 94. I'm not quite sure how many, but we had some private schools that chose, or independent schools that chose not to participate.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Any other comments?
No.
Thanks, Chris.
Anything else?
Madam Chairman, are we about done?
We are.
I would like to digress, if I may, to that discussion we were having after Dr. Holcomb made his remarks about impact study that I think that we really need to talk about seriously and soon. And that has to do, and I'm glad that Raymond is here. I was hoping that he would get here so we could discuss this in his presence. But I think that we need to, as a board and as a committee and as an organization, think very carefully and quickly about exactly what the impact is going to be on our business here in the state of Texas, in higher education, and for that matter, for the whole country. The things that are bothering me a great deal now, we talked about the endowments and how the recession had caused them to drop by some 50% or thereabouts in many cases. But there's also the question of currency evaluations. And that, to me, is one of the very, very important issues that we're going to have to come to grips with. And I think this needs to be a serious planning exercise. For instance, first of all, the United States, printed $1 trillion last week in new money, which just by definition forced the value of the dollar down. So if you just take that one item and say, okay, the value of the dollar has depreciated X, well, it may depreciate more as government spending continues and foreigners keep buying up our debt. My point is that it has impact in many areas. Not one has to do with what we were talking about. It's very simplistic. With unemployment the way it is, the dollar is low. Are people going to be able to send their kids to college like they did in the past? I think that's a serious question. The other is, what is going to be the impact on foreign students? If you've got a euro that's worth more than $1, it's very, if I was on the other side of the pond, I would be figuring out how to get my kids into U.S. schools because it's so much cheaper, because the value of the dollar has gone down. I mean, there's so many assumptions that need to be made here, and I don't know that we as a board, I'm pretty sure that we as a board don't have the talent to do it other than to ask the question. But it seems to me we need an impact study with somebody, some ace economist, working on it that could take all these events that are taking place every day and the change in the way this country operates and see what the impact of that's going to be on higher education. It's got to have an impact. It may be up, it may be down, it may be devastating. I don't know. But it just seems to me we just can't sit and continue to look at history and do studies based on history. Now, I'm not knocking Holcomb at all, please, or David, or anything you had to say, David. I'm just trying to look forward and see how do we dodge a bullet. And I think we've got some very serious problems facing this nation, and higher education is going to suffer. I'm afraid. I don't know how. Well, we're going to get some temporary relief because they're throwing money at the problem. So even if Rick decides to take a bundle of that free money that's coming out of Washington, and from what I know about the position he's taking, I think I like it. But you go beyond that, what happens at the end of this year when that money is not available next year? And now we have taken this money and we've expended it and we've improved higher education or whatever else, and next year it goes away. What's that going to do to the state budget? What's that going to do to the funding for all of these programs that we have that we want to do for higher education? You know, that's a one-time event of getting a big flush of money. But it's like putting a needle in your arm when you were a druggie. You know, you get hooked on it. But then when you're done, you've got the shakes, I guess. I don't know. But it's not a good deal, I don't think, for us to just not address this issue sooner rather than later. Because this, to me, is really big-time planning, like we've probably never done before in our history. Not this organization, but maybe the state or the nation, for that matter. So, I mean, these are all things. Now, one of the things that comes to mind, and I say this is an example, somebody like, not necessarily this person, but somebody like a Ray Perryman that does these kinds of studies, economic studies and so forth. And I read every one that he gets, and he makes a lot of sense in a lot of areas. But if it's not Ray Perryman, it's somebody like him. But we need somebody that can come in here that really takes a fresh look at everything we're doing, because I think in the next year or two, this whole country and this whole business is going to be a different place. And we need to plan for it and be on the leading edge of it instead of the trailing edge. And I wish that we could sit down and have this discussion with Whit and with Fred and the board. I don't know whether it's a special board meeting. I'm just throwing all these ideas out as things that I think that we need to think about, and not just business as usual, because business is changing. And
yeah, it reminds me of the discussions that we had about incentive funding, and that if we do get some sort of one-time amount of money, we sure do need to think of how to use it.
That's right.
Raymond, David, y'all want to respond?
Well, Joe, I think that the points you're making are absolutely accurate. There's no doubt that the changing economic situation will have an impact on everything we do around the country. I can tell you this. Let me address some of your questions. David and I are in regular communication with the governor's office about the stimulus funding, and one of the issues that we're wrestling with is how we make certain that the stimulus money doesn't make us dependent on the continuing supply of that money, which of course will not occur. And Jay Kimbrough and I spoke about that this morning. We're assuming that we get some of that stimulus money for higher education and tuition mitigation. We are going to talk about how we can make certain that institutions understand that this is one-time money and they have to use it in such a way that it will mitigate tuition, but it will not be a store of money, fund of money that they will expect to rely on. Long term, all I can tell you is that there are a lot of people who are concerned about precisely the same issue that you are. We are watching the reports, we're watching articles and essays that are being written about the changing world and what it means to higher education, both in terms of national and international context. We're following that literature closely, and as soon as the dust settles a little bit, I think we have to do exactly what you're suggesting. The problem is right now, is we don't even know what the language in the stimulus bill means.
That's right.
There is a lot of uncertainty about what the feds want to do with this money. I understand that the feds aren't totally sure themselves, much less at the state level, so we're monitoring that situation closely. But I agree, we're playing, the game has changed.
It really is, and if we sat down and just went through the list, Raymond, of all the alternatives, let's make an assumption that it's going to, one set of circumstances is going to take place, and examine that pretty closely. And well, if that doesn't work, then what other alternative might there be? And go through a very systematic, sophisticated planning exercise that's really forward-looking. It's like strategic planning in a huge corporation that's going 5 years, 10 years out. And you plan for it and make your best educated guesses. But you're not just left there holding a bucket empty when the time comes that you need to do something. It just seems to me that we really need to pay attention to this. And we've got meetings coming up in April. We've got a board meeting. Mm-hmm. But it would seem to me this would be a good area of discussion with the whole board sitting in a room.
Well, I think...
And giving you guys the time to think about the idea in-house too, and come to grips with how we might approach it. And I don't have an answer. I've got a lot of questions, but I don't have very many answers.
Well, I suggest that we can make this a topic of discussion at the July board meeting. I think we'll need some time to prepare, and after the session is over, and I think we need more clarity about the stimulus package. But I think at the July board meeting, we ought to be able to talk about some preliminary steps we should take to address your issue.
And it would seem to me it'd be to our advantage if we started some deep thought on that
right away.
I
agree.
One of the advantages that's connected to this is the board has already, through the formula, talked about ways to use existing dollars more efficiently by paying by the end of the semester and for outcomes. So that was even before this was started. The board has also talked about, while increasing funding to higher education, to become more efficient and more effective. So that's the beginning part of it. Not to narrow it even more. And one thing that I have wondered about, beyond the stimulus dollars, but in terms of the economy, and we always say we don't know how many students leave Texas to go to other states. I've been wondering just lately, in talking to other parents, how many parents were planning on their kids going out of state whose kids are now going to stay in Texas. So are we going to have sort of a greater retention, but there's a need to help support those students when they're here? How many students, parents who in the past had no concern about sending their students to college, you mentioned that earlier, will now be more taxed? In that base of students who have financial need, are we going to see a greater increase than we might have anticipated? I don't know, but I think those are all things that we have to think about.
Out there, David, that are unknowns. We run crude oil prices up to nearly $150. The Treasury is running over at that number, and then it drops down to $32. All of a sudden, they're stacking the rigs all over the world and shutting operations down because they can't make money. And yet, the crude market is coming back up. Last I saw, it was about $51, $52. Probably going to be $60 shortly. And a lot of that's going to be because the dollar is going down, so the big kids in the Middle East are going to want more dollars.
Right. Well, I think part of this is scenario planning, so it's the worst.
But all
case,
these things impact on our whole economy,
right.
And it's going to back up on education just as sure as the world. Our ability to pay for all this stuff, and I just think that we got the idea on the table that I think we agree we need to do something. And if you guys could be doing something between now and our next meeting or two to get that out. Now, I know I've talked with Whit and Fred about a retreat where we could sit down and really do some strategic forward planning. So in the last discussion I had with Whit about that, we were talking about after the legislative session is down and sine die is taking care of all of that, then maybe we could start to think about getting together in the midsummer or late summer sometime and really give some serious thought to this, because I don't know which way to jump anymore. Things change so fast. And I know, having been on the other side of the pond for so many years and watching currency translations, and there were years when we made more money on currency exchanges than we made on oil. So, I mean, there's so much that just goes on, and I don't know. I don't think anybody knows, and the people in Washington don't know. Hell, they don't know any more about it than we do.
It seems like
trial and error.
that there's been a great step up in advertising for the distance education, I've noticed, and I suspect that that's going to continue, and there might need to be some, we might want to develop a policy to educate people more in making those choices.
Yeah, Raymond's talked about another state that requires each student take. Is it Maryland?
I think so, yeah.
Well, I think that not only in the higher education with our flagship universities and four-year colleges, but I think as a part of this whole process, we've got to examine what role the community colleges, technical colleges are going to play in all this.
Okay, and related to that is, to broaden what you were saying, is really the delivery system. We've talked for a number of years that if we're really going to have the expansion that we're talking about, can we really hire as many faculty as we would need to do business as usual, and how do we use other delivery systems effectively to expand that access? And part of that is can you provide certain baccalaureate programs through online education to remote community college students who might not be able to travel, for example. So there are a number of things that we probably should be doing anyway, and this speeds up the timetable for doing it.
I just think we need to ratchet up, and I'd like to see Texas on the leading edge of this thing instead of the trailing edge, or the bleeding edge, as we used to say. Anyway,
That's a good point. We'll start working on it.
Yeah.
I made my speech.
I guess the first easiest cut you could make in sending your kid to college or to higher ed would be stay home. So we may have a great influx. Who knows? We don't know.
Well, I've watched it before when I was on the other side of the ocean, and when the currencies would change in the values. I remember when it was almost 2-to-1 against the pound sterling dollar, and people were buying real estate in New York like drunk sailors at any price. Kids were being sent to the U.S. to school all over the place, and I mean first-rate schools, whether it's UCLA to Harvard, all across the country. And employees of mine that worked all over Europe, they talked openly about it. Now's the time to get those kids in U.S. school. Well, where are we going to put them? And with the differential between the currency exchanges is such that I'm fearful that we're going to get more of them than we know what to do with.
Most of them are already in grad school here.
Yeah.
If they're Chinese, they can just buy a few hotels.
Coming in.
We could increase
at the community colleges and at the four-year college. Anyway,
okay.
I want to get to the other show.
Good. That's a great suggestion. Yeah. Thank you. Commissioner, you have any words for us?
Well, I spent most of the day at the Capitol. As I said, I talked to the governor's office about stimulus funding. The governor's office is still working on how it's going to divide up the money. We don't have any indication at this point what will occur. Then I spent some time talking about, David and I spent some time talking about the expansion of higher education opportunities in Northwest Houston. Remember that?
I do. I remember it.
And Senator Patrick convened a number of presidents and chancellors to talk about how we make certain that we do it right, and David and I laid out what some of the parameters would be, what we thought the concerns of the coordinating board would be before they approve any programs. I think there was a good spirit of cooperation and consensus about how to do this right. Then I spent
the community college is about to step up and buy 1.2 million square feet of space to house this for themselves and the institutions.
Yeah, that's good. Well, how is our cherished idea of the college-going culture in every school, maintaining over there?
Well, then I spent several hours talking with Representative Olivo and other members of the legislature about House Bill and Senate Bill 3 and how to make certain of precisely that we do continue to promote college-going culture. Robert Scott and Bill Ratliff and I are meeting with Senator Shapiro tomorrow, and then we're meeting with Representative Eisler Wednesday morning, and we think we have some consensus about how we can make House Bill / Senate Bill 3 work. We testified last week. Lori testified before both the House and Senate committees, did a really good job of presenting ideas about how we could strengthen the bills, and I think we'll end up with a good bill.
Well, that's good to hear.
Anything new about top tier? I noticed Dr. Couture was on the flight this morning, so I'm assuming that there was something going on.
No, she was here to talk about
she was about
Northwest Houston.
I see.
Yeah.
She may have had something else, but she was
we're testifying on Wednesday on National Research Universities. We've been asked to do a side-by-side comparison of the 3 bills. Is it, McGregor?
There's more like 10.
Well, but we're going to look at 3, I believe.
I was told to do a side-by-side analysis of about 10.
Oh. Well, then we'll take a look at all bills and come up with some analysis of
Now,
the different approaches.
you may have been misquoted in how they told me to do the analysis, but I was told to do an analysis on 10 by you.
Oh, well, I didn't know there were 10.
I didn't either until he was asked to do.
Most of them are companion bills.
Yeah. So we will do that, and then the week from this Wednesday, we will testify before the Senate Higher Education Committee on tuition deregulation and the consequences of re-regulating tuition. I know that Lee spoke about that earlier today.
Yeah.
Whose bill is it that, I think it's Senator Shapiro's, but is it her bill that once that freshman enters the university, that tuition is frozen at that rate? Was that her bill? That it's like
there are a lot of those bills as well. I don't remember whose belongs to whom.
I don't remember
that as a person enters as a freshman, as long as he or she is in for whatever the 4 or 5 years, I think, then the tuition is at that rate and doesn't.
Well, that's the governor's proposal as well. So yeah, it probably is Shapiro's bill. I think she.
That kind of makes a lot of sense because that still frees up the institutions as they see fit, and yet that individual student is locked in.
Yeah, but the fear is that that institutions will front load their tuition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they'll pay up they'll factor in the cost of inflation up front. So.
I think some of this renewal of this push for the dual tracks is we could forestall some of that. I think if we could only come up with a better slogan, because college for all Texans. It's awkward, but we need college/career for all Texans, or C to the second for all Texans, and some cute little thing somewhere. But it really, these words are important, and I think we can see that by pushing that, we got people's dander up big time.
Well, we've already made one significant change. The college readiness standards that you approved a year and some months ago have now been recoined as the the college/career readiness
We
standards.
noticed that today, yeah.
So we're moving in that direction, but we are talking more and more about career and college readiness, or more generically talking about post-secondary readiness. But you're right. What really triggered this whole thing was, it was more than any. It was not so much what the coordinating board did, but rather going to the 4x4 curriculum, and a lot of people in career and technical education believing that meant 4 years of academic work in all key disciplinary areas. And I've talked to Robert Scott about this at some length, and that was never the intention. So,
But it was
you're right. It was messaged that way.
Message, and then we can move on and say, oh, and by the way, you have to have the same skills for the workforce. You know, the rigor message.
You're right. The message is what's really important. And for example, when I met with Bill Ratliff last week, and I told him what our position was, he said, well, I'm fine with that. And I said, well, I thought you would be.
Yeah, I was surprised when I heard, I guess, the mischaracterization of his position.
Okay.
Any more discussion? Okay, the meeting is adjourned. I'm assuming you all agree with me, so I'm not taking a vote. Okay.